For years, my son and daughter-in-law treated my retirement like it belonged to them, babysitting errands, deliveries whenever they called. But the day I finally said no, my daughter-in-law pushed too far. And at one family dinner, she gave me the perfect reason to end it for good. The Sunday dinner table smelled of rosemary roast chicken, fresh green beans, and warm sourdough bread. I had spent 4 hours in my kitchen preparing the meal, just like I did every weekend since my husband Thomas passed away 2 years ago. My son Mark sat on my left, scrolling through his phone while his wife Brittany adjusted her silver earrings across from me. 6-year-old Toby was happily coloring on a paper napkin. "Mom, pass the butter," Mark said, without looking up from his screen. I handed him the dish, watching how Brittany watched me. Her eyes always carried an appraising look, evaluating everything in my small, single-story home in suburban Columbus. She worked in commercial property leasing, always sharp, always projecting an image of effortless authority. "We need to talk about next month's schedule, Evelyn," Brittany said, setting her fork down with a deliberate tap against the porcelain. "Mark and I are joining the executive golf retreat in Scottsdale. We booked our flights for the 3rd through the 10th. "That sounds exciting," I said evenly. "I hope you both enjoy the break." "Well, it's not just a vacation, it's networking," she replied, leaning forward on her elbows. "So we'll drop Toby off here on Thursday morning. You'll take him to soccer on Saturday, pick him up from after-school robotics, and keep him until the following Monday night." I placed my cloth napkin beside my plate. "I'm sorry, Brittany, but I won't be available that week. I enrolled in an advanced botanical drafting workshop at the Community Arts Center. The sessions run all day." Brittany's expression hardened immediately. A thin smirk pulled at her lips as she leaned back against her chair. "A drawing class." "You're retired, Evelyn. Toby needs routine, not a babysitter who charges $40 an hour. You're being completely unreasonable." I picked up the bread basket and offered it to Toby, saying nothing. The silence hung between us for only a few seconds before Brittany shook her head and reached for the water pitcher. Mark kept his gaze fixed on his plate, cutting his meat with unnecessary precision. This was not the first time my personal calendar had been treated as open public property. 2 months earlier, Brittany had scheduled a master bathroom renovation at their house. Without asking, she had redirected 4 heavy freight deliveries of imported ceramic tile to my driveway, leaving me unable to park inside my own garage for 3 weeks. When I asked when the contractor would move them, she told me I had plenty of space to walk around the pallets, and that family helped family. Before that, she had signed Mark up for evening management seminars, assuming I would drive 30 minutes across town 3 days a week to prepare their family dinners and oversee Toby's bath routine. When I gently reminded her that evening, driving strained my eyes in the winter rain, she had simply sighed and remarked that modern grandparents usually embraced every opportunity to remain useful. Now, sitting under the warm light of my dining room chandelier, Brittany checked her watch. "Let's be practical," she said briskly. "The workshop can be refunded or you can take it in the spring. Mark's career relies on this Scottsdale networking trip. It's an investment in your grandson's future stability. The drafting class is non-refundable and it meets only once a year," I said calmly. "Toby is welcome here on Friday evening through Sunday noon, but you will need to find childcare for the weekdays." "You have 7 open days every week," Brittany stated, crossing her arms. "You're choosing pencils over your own family." Mark cleared his throat, glancing nervously between us. "Brittany, maybe we can look at the community center daycare options for those couple of days." Brittany ignored him completely, her stare locked directly onto mine. On Monday morning, the house felt peaceful again. The morning sun illuminated the collection of architectural sketches I had kept in my study from my 30 years as a municipal draftsman for the County Parks Department. Since Thomas died, I had allowed my routines to dissolve, slowly filling the empty hours with Mark and Brittany's endless logistical errands. At 9 o'clock, Brittany's white Lexus pulled into the driveway. She stepped out in her tailored navy trousers, holding a dry cleaning bag and a clipboard. I opened the front door before she could use her spare key. "Good you're awake," Brittany said, stepping onto the porch. "The dry cleaner lost the button on my wool coat, so I brought it for you to fix. Also, The landscaping company is coming to our house between noon and 3. I need you to wait there so they don't tear up the hydrangeas near the patio. She tried to hand me the hanger, but I kept my hands rested comfortably in my cardigan pockets. I won't be able to do that today, Brittany, I told her, keeping my voice gentle and steady. I have volunteer hours at the Civic Conservatory starting at 10, and afterward I am meeting an old colleague for lunch. Brittany froze the hanger, hovering in midair. Her brow furrowed as she looked at my dressed-up slate trousers and low walking shoes. Since when do you volunteer on Mondays? You always do our laundry and errands on Mondays. I signed up for the conservatory cataloging team last Friday, I replied. The county gardens are updating their historical plant registry. She lowered the coat slowly, her irritation obvious. You're suddenly very busy all of a sudden, Evelyn. This is getting inconvenient for everyone. It is a wonderful project, I said. Have a productive day at the office. I closed the door smoothly. On Thursday afternoon, I drove across the county line to the public library where the municipal land records were archived. Working through the dusty blue binders reminded me of the precise drafting methods I had practiced for decades. Every parcel, every boundary line, and every formal easement was documented with exact measurements. Life, like drafting, required clear perimeters to prevent encroachment. When I returned home, my phone showed 4 missed calls from Mark and 2 text messages from Brittany. The first message read, "Need you to pick up Toby from school today at 3:15. Emergency client meeting." The second, sent 20 minutes later, read, "Never mind. Had to pay the emergency after-school fee. We need to talk." At 6 in the evening, Mark arrived at my house alone. He looked tired, his tie loosened around his collar. He sat on the wooden stool at the kitchen counter while I poured hot water over 2 chamomile tea bags. "Mom, Brittany is stressed," Mark began, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "She feels like you're pulling away right when things are getting tough at her firm." "I am simply living my life, Mark," I said, sliding a mug toward him. "I raised you and I love Toby dearly. But I am not an on-call service for your household." "Nobody thinks of you as a service," he said defensively. "We just depend on you. Brittany's parents live in Florida, so you're the only family we have close by. When you suddenly say no to small favors, it puts pressure on our marriage. Taking on full-time childcare, running daily errands, and managing house deliveries are not small favors," I noted quietly. "They are household responsibilities that belong to both of you." Mark looked down at the steam rising from his mug, unable to meet my eyes, aware of the truth in my words. The following Tuesday, I visited the local hardware store to buy brass numbers for my porch and a heavy-duty deadbolt. For the past year, Brittany had carried a spare key to my house, which she frequently used without knocking, often dropping off laundry or retrieving garden tools while I was in the shower or reading in the backyard. When I finished installing the new lock, I packed the original key set into a small padded envelope. That afternoon, I attended my first botanical drafting session at the Arts Center. For 3 uninterrupted hours, I focused on line weights, shading, and the intricate vascular systems of oak leaves. The creative focus brought a sense of vitality I had not felt since Thomas was alive. After class, I walked through the adjacent park, watching parents push strollers and children ride bicycles along the paved trails. I realized that by constantly stepping in to rescue Mark and Brittany from normal adult planning, I had allowed them to treat my time as entirely valueless. My compliance had not built gratitude. It had merely built entitlement. When I arrived home, my neighbor Clara was watering her marigolds near the fence line. "Evelyn, your son stopped by around 2 o'clock. Clara called out with a friendly wave. He tried his key in the lock, looked confused, and then made a phone call before driving off. "Thank you, Clara," I replied. I changed the hardware this morning. I walked inside, hung my coat in the hall closet, and set my drawing pad on the dining room table. 10 minutes later, Mark called my mobile phone. "Mom, did you change the front door lock?" he asked, his voice strained. "I tried to drop off some dry cleaning for you." "Yes, the old tumbler was sticking," I said evenly. I'll see you at Sunday dinner. During the week leading up to the family gathering, I continued my daily schedule at the conservatory. Cataloging the antique plant presses required precision and patience qualities that brought order to my days. I also met twice with my financial advisor to review the modest pension and municipal life insurance Thomas had left behind. Everything was in proper order. My home was paid off. My vehicle was 10 years old but meticulously maintained, and my savings were structured to support my healthcare and living expenses, indefinitely provided I did not deplete them on unnecessary outside demands. On Friday afternoon, Brittany called my landline. Her tone was unusually sweet-coated in professional charm. "Evelyn, we're hosting a dinner this Sunday at our house instead," she announced cheerfully. "My parents are flying in early from Sarasota for the long weekend, along with my sister Lauren and her husband. We want everyone together." "That sounds lovely," I said. "What can I bring?" "Oh, just your famous lemon meringue pies and that big bowl of potato salad," Brittany replied smoothly. "And please come by around 1 in the afternoon to help me prep the tenderloin and set up the patio tables." "I have my studio drawing class until 3 on Sunday," I replied. "I will arrive at 5 o'clock with the pies." There was a long pause on the line. I could hear the faint click of Brittany's computer mouse. "Fine," she said, her voice turning cold again. 5 o'clock sharp. And don't forget the pies. My father loves them." When she hung up, I did not feel the usual tightening in my chest. Instead, I simply took out my recipe cards, measured the flour and sugar, and marked my calendar for 5 o'clock. The structure was set, and I had no intention of deviating from it. Sunday afternoon was crisp and clear. The autumn leaves in Mark and Brittany's upscale subdivision were glowing gold and rust under the late October sun. I arrived at their 2-story colonial at exactly 5 minutes before 5, carrying 2 freshly baked lemon meringue pies in protective glass carriers. Inside the house was filled with conversation. Brittany's parents, Arthur and Diane, were seated on the beige leather sofa in the living room with glasses of Pinot Noir. Lauren and her husband were chatting near the kitchen island while Toby played with wooden blocks on the rug. "Evelyn?" "Hello," Diane said, standing up to give me a polite, airy hug. "The house looks wonderful, doesn't it? Brittany always knows how to host." "Good evening, Diane," I said, placing the pies on the sideboard. Brittany came out of the kitchen holding a platter of roasted asparagus. She wore a tailored cream sweater and gold hoop earrings. She glanced at the clock on the microwave, then at the pies. "You're right on time," she remarked, though her voice lacked warmth. "We had to rush the table setup ourselves since you were busy with your art hobby." Mark emerged from the kitchen carrying the carved beef tenderloin. He looked visibly uncomfortable, his eyes flicking toward his in-laws before offering me a quick, tight smile. "Hi, Mom. Thanks for bringing dessert." We all moved into the formal dining room, taking our seats around the long mahogany table. Arthur sat at the head with Diane and Lauren on his right. I was seated opposite Brittany, with Mark beside me and Toby next to his father. For the first 20 minutes, the conversation centered on Arthur's golf club in Florida and Lauren's recent promotion at an accounting firm. I listened, nodded, and ate my dinner quietly. As the main plates were cleared, Brittany poured more wine for her parents. She exchanged a meaningful look with her sister, then folded her linen napkin into a precise square beside her glass. "And since we're all here together as a family," Brittany began projecting her voice across the table, "Mark and I wanted to share our plans for next year. We've been looking at the preparatory academy on the north side for Toby. The curriculum is incredible, especially their early STEM development." "That sounds wonderful, honey," Diane said, beaming. "Early education makes all the difference." "It really does," Brittany agreed. "The tuition is $22,000 a year, but to make the logistics work, we need a reliable system. Since the academy is 40 minutes north, Mark and I calculated that we need someone dedicated to handling morning drop-offs, afternoon pickups, and after-school tutoring." She turned her eyes directly to me. "Evelyn, we've decided the most practical arrangement is for you to give up your weekend classes and weekday volunteer projects. If you take over Toby's transportation and after-school care full-time, We can manage the tuition without hiring private drivers." The table grew quiet. Mark looked down at his water glass, turning it slowly between his palms, remaining entirely silent. "Brittany," I said evenly, "I am glad you are exploring good schools for Toby. However, as I explained last week, I have committed my weekdays to the conservatory archives and my studio courses. I cannot take on daily transportation across the county." Brittany's smile vanished instantly. She set her wine glass down with enough force that the stem clinked against the crystal dessert plate. "Are you serious?" she asked, her voice sharp with sudden irritation. "You'd rather draw dried leaves at a desk than invest in your only grandson's future?" Arthur and Diane froze, glancing between their daughter and me with awkward surprise. Mark reached out to touch Brittany's forearm, but she pulled away with an angry jerk of her shoulder. "We provide you with family company and purpose, Evelyn." Brittany said, her voice rising in front of the entire room. She looked around the table seeking validation from her parents before locking eyes with me, a sharp, patronizing smirk spreading across her face. "You sit in that big house all day, doing nothing while we work 50 hours a week. You're so selfish." The insult landed like a physical blow against the air in the room. Diane gasped softly, and Mark turned bright red, burying his face in his hands. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice, nor did my hands tremble. I calmly picked up my cloth napkin, dabbed the corners of my mouth, and placed it neatly beside my plate. I looked directly into Brittany's eyes, holding her gaze until her triumphant expression began to waver. "I may be selfish with my remaining years, Brittany, but for the past 2 years, I quietly paid $46,000 to clear the maxed-out store credit cards you opened under Mark's name, so you could qualify for this mortgage. And as of 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, my automatic monthly subsidy to Mark's checking account is permanently closed." The smirk vanished from Brittany's face instantly. Her jaw dropped slightly, all color draining from her cheeks. Arthur stopped chewing his roll, his eyes widening in shock as he stared at his daughter. Diane looked at Mark, horrified, while Lauren looked down at her lap in total embarrassment. The entire dining room plunged into absolute suffocating silence. Nobody moved. Nobody uttered a single word. I pushed my chair back slowly, the wooden legs gliding smoothly across the hardwood floor. I stood up, smoothed the front of my cardigan, and walked around the silent table to Toby. I kissed the top of his head gently. "Good night, Toby," I said. "Be good for your dad." Mark stood up, his face pale, his mouth opening as if to speak, but no words came out. He looked at the floor, crushed under the weight of his own financial reality, and the truth now laid bare before his in-laws. Brittany remained frozen in her seat, staring blankly at the polished mahogany table, completely stripped of her arrogance. I retrieved my wool coat from the entryway closet and stepped out into the cool evening air. The night was crisp, the stars visible between the bare branches of the suburban maples. When I turned the ignition of my car, there was no knot of anxiety in my stomach, only an overwhelming sense of lightness. The following morning, I arrived at the bank at 8 sharp to sign the paperwork, discontinuing the monthly transfer that had shielded Mark from his wife's reckless spending. From now on, they would navigate their choices as equal partners, facing the real numbers of their own lifestyle. By 9:30, I was at my drafting desk at the Arts Center, adjusting the natural light over a clean sheet of heavy vellum. The pencil felt steady and balanced in my hand. Mark called 3 days later to apologize, his tone subdued and genuinely respectful. I accepted his apology warmly, but I did not offer money and I did not rearrange my schedule. We agreed to have lunch once a month on Saturdays. My home was quiet, my boundaries were respected, and my time belonged entirely to the life I had built.